Hello and welcome to Migrating Electronic Theses and Dissertations, ETDs, from a locally created database to a commercial platform. Sharing this information with you is Elizabeth McDonald from University of Memphis, and my name is Ruth Liu, and I will be your moderator for the next 50 minutes. During this concurrent session, one session will be held in the main room and the other session will be here in the break room. And for all of these sessions, please, we will reserve 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the session for discussion. So we've already had a lot of questions for Liz, and we will have more questions at the end of her presentation. Just a quick reminder before we begin, during the presentation, participants should keep your audio muted. Please feel free to use the Zoom chat tab to ask questions, which will be addressed during the discussion segment. Thank you all for joining us, and I will turn it over to the wonderful Liz. Liz.
Well, thank you for the introduction. I'm happy to be with you all this afternoon when we talk about this. Just to give a little bit more background on who I am, I'm a special projects cataloger at the University of Memphis in the libraries. I currently live in the government publications department. I previously was up in the catalog department, so I've kind of been making the rounds, and I'm looking forward to talking to you all about this. So I thought I would start just by showing you on the left side, that's what our homegrown platform looked like. And on the right side is we went to bepress's Digital Commons is the one that we went to. It's actually a university, it's a university libraries institutional repository and not a strictly University of Memphis institutional repository. So in addition to ETDs, it houses our special collections information. It's got government documents and they keep adding to it. So that's what the old looked like, and this is what the new looks like.
Thank you, Liz. We cannot see, for some reason, we cannot see the screen. Could you maybe reshare your screen with us, please?
I sure will. I'm sorry about that. Let me get out of this. Let me unshare, and yes. Did I unshare? This works so well in the practice. It seems to be stuck. And you still can't see it. I am sorry.
Are you not seeing your open windows when you click the share button?
I've got the share button, but it's stuck on green, and when I click on it, it's not doing anything.
I think that is very weird.
I think it's very weird too. Let me give me a second and
try again.
Okay, let me see if I can bring my presentation over again. Do you see the presentation?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. I apologize, everyone. I'm not quite sure what's going on with this, and you can't see it yet. Okay, let's try. Can you see my PowerPoint?
No.
No.
Liz, I was able to get to the uploading site, and I only see 2 pages of the presentation. Is that what you have?
No, there are 2. There should be 14 screens.
Okay. Probably the second one. Okay. Yeah, I should be able to share here.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes.
Technology is wonderful.
I agree. When it works.
When it works. Thank you so much. Whoops.
Okay. Perfect.
There we go. Okay, so this is the opening one. If you can go to the next slide. And this is the example of what I was talking about. On the left side, you see our original homegrown system. And on the right side, you see the newer Digital Commons landing pages for both of them. And we were going from the left to the right. Now, if you can, new slide. So I wanted to give you a little background about our homegrown system so you understand what it was we were working on. It was initially created in 2010. I was part of the original committee that worked on the creation and the move from print to the ETDs. And it was required by fall and spring of 2010 and 2011 that students would use it. Prior to that, there was a period in which they could use it, but they didn't have to. The committee that created it was composed of people from the graduate school, from information technology, and the library. The graduate school component was the graduate school analyst, and she was the person who was used to analyzing the print theses and dissertations, so she knew what she needed to see. IT is the individual that built the program. And we had 3 people from the library. The individual who headed the committee was the head of reference. I was part of the committee from cataloging as metadata, and then our head of our library systems was part of the committee. He wasn't in so much the day-to-day operations, but he was keeping an eye on it. And so we worked together for this for quite some time. And what we did is the system was going to house both master's degrees and PhD, ETDs, and Doctor of Musical Arts is the DMA. So all of our graduate degrees were going to be going into it. The reason that's important is because previously the graduate school had only put graduate level PhD, ETD, and DMAs into ProQuest. For some reason, they didn't think master's degrees would go in there. And we did, going forward, put master's degrees into this system. It was designed to be an actually complete system. So the students would log in and submit their thesis and dissertation. They would then, the graduate analyst would go through, tell them you need to make these need to make these changes. It would be sent back to the student, and all of the communication back and forth would occur within the system. Then as soon as the graduate school selected submit, it went into the public-facing view, which I showed you earlier. And then it was available to be extracted. One of the things that I was able to do with the individual at IT is to get the extract that I would do monthly set up in such a way that it would help me create the MARC records that would go into our integrated library system. And that was very, very helpful because it cut down on the amount of massaging that I had to do with the extract information in order to create the MARC records. It was set up, and one of the advantages of the homegrown system is it was interfaced with our banner system. And I don't know if you're not familiar with banner systems. It's an entire system which handles finance, which handles student records, which handles employee information for the entire university. So once that interface was created, when the student logged into our local system, it populated the ETD system with the student's name, the program they were in, their major, their concentration. All of that information was automatically populated into the system. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the overall project, even though I won't go into details about the overall project. The project was to load the ETDs from our local system into the digital commons, which was the main part of it. And then we had to load ProQuest, ProQuest PhDs into the digital commons because the graduate school had stopped, and I'll mention this in the next slide. At one point, the graduate school stopped using the local system for PhDs and went to ProQuest. And then once we got everything loaded into the digital commons, then we updated the records in our Sierra integrated library system, our library catalog. And then we needed to update, then we use OCLC as our vendor, and we needed to update the OCLC records with the new URLs and links to the new system. And then we had to set up the ongoing processing of the new ETDs. So that was the overall project. Yes, the next slide. some of the project issues that we had going in. As I said, in 2017 and 2018, the graduate school decided to move the PhDs into the ProQuest ETD administrator system. They did not move the masters because they still did not believe that masters were in ProQuest. I think they were still in the mindset of it being dissertation abstracts. And I was able to say, no, my master's is in there. And we were able to get, from the point we got into the digital commons, that it was going to be one route. But because they had moved those systems, those records over, we wound up having to do a dual migration. We had to not only migrate our ETDs from the system, we had to migrate those from the ProQuest system. And so the ProQuest portion, I won't do more than just to say a few words about it right now. But we also had in the ProQuest system, when they stopped using the entire system at the graduate school and went completely to the ETD administrator, we weren't completely caught up with the entire migration project. So we had to, once we got everything moving, we had to go back and do the ProQuest portion, which meant we didn't have XML experience within the library. So we were relying on it from the IT department, and that was a major portion of what we were doing as well. But that's all I'm going to talk about the ProQuest process. And getting the information from our old system into the new system, it's an iterative process, and I'm going to show it and talk about it as if it went in a single, we did this, we did this, we did this, when in actuality we would do this, rinse, repeat, go through it again to correct what wasn't working the last time through the whole time. The process was initiated in October 2021. We had most of the records from the local system loaded by April 2022. There were still a few weird holdouts that were being done afterwards, and that was the time at the point of which we started with the ProQuest process. The team that worked on this migration from homegrown to bepress was the digital initiatives coordinator. And he was and is the individual who is responsible for our digital commons as a whole. As I said, we have other aspects from the library, special collections and that. So he was responsible for helping us set that portion of it up for the ETDs. And he did a lot of the coordination between what we were needing and what bepress was doing. Then we have the Director of Web and Mobile Services, which may seem like an odd person to do that, but he was actually the individual who had created the homegrown system for us. And that homegrown system in 2010 was the first project he had worked on. And as you can tell, because he became a director, he's very good at what he does and had progressed through the system. And then I was in the system as the cataloger, who had metadata experience and knew what we were trying to use, trying to make sure we got the information into our catalog as well. During this process, we consulted with the RAD, which is Research Assistance Desk, which is essentially, think of it as our reference desk and our instruction librarians. The Digital Resources Initiatives Coordinator and I met with them at least 2 times, showing what it was we were working on to try to make sure that the process going into the digital commons would meet with their expectations. One of the issues we had with the homegrown system is the interface for searching was a little bit on the clunky side. And so we wanted to make sure it wasn't clunky and that the information was being presented in a way in which was useful for them and for our users. We also consulted with the graduate school analyst during the time from when we did this originally to the migration. We'd had a change in graduate school deans, and we'd had a change in graduate school analysts. And the graduate school analyst that we worked with and that we found out some of the information from actually left the university about 2 months into the project. So we were able to get as much information from her before that, but that did slow us down sometimes with things we were trying to figure out. Next slide. So The first step in all of this was we needed to analyze the data as it was stored in our actual homegrown system. And as I said, the individual who designed that local system was still with the university, and I am so grateful that he was still here. I cannot imagine trying to do this process without the person who had designed the system, because even though it had been a number of years since he designed it, he knew how the data was organized, he knew what was going on, and it simplified the process. So we did a series of extracts from the old system into Excel spreadsheets and began to look at the data. And one of the things we had to look at, I had to particularly come up to date with how the data was stored in the old system and what fields were used. Because as I said, I had been able to set up an extract that helped me create MARC records. And so, for example, that extract allowed me to have, instead of separate fields for authors, I could get it in author, last name, comma, first name, middle name, but I had to see how they actually were parsed in the system itself. I was spoiled and had to get back into understanding the actual system itself. During the extracts, there were times when the initial extracts, there were missing fields, because he just did, I think this is a good extract to start with. And so, for example, the first initial extract didn't have keywords and it didn't have any information on restrictions within the field. So we would build it going out upwards from that initial extraction. We also had to do quite a bit of conversation among all of ourselves about how the embargoes had been set up and how they were functioning, because it had been a while and each of us had a thought about how they were functioning, and they weren't necessarily functioning that way within the system. The way it works here is the students are allowed to choose any length of embargo they want to. It's entirely up to them. And so the system had been set up so that embargoes went to, when an embargo was cleared, it went into university access only. And we also have permanent embargoes. So we had to figure out and be reminded that exactly how they were set up and how they were functioning in the old system. And I'm repeating myself, and I'm sorry about that. We also had a number of local fields that we had to deal with. And we had an ETD number. Thankfully, we had an ETD number that was automatically assigned by the system that had been created. And we had loaded that information into our ILS system. And we needed to make sure that number went in, because that number was the hook we used, or I used, to make sure that the new URLs got into the right bibliographic record in our online system. We also, when we set this up, the graduate analyst wanted it to be the information that we had on each of these theses and dissertations to be the major and the concentrations. They did not want departments. And so we had to get the information for all of the major concentrations, and the initial exports came coded, because the system interfaced with our banner system. We got the banner codes. And so we had to go back and get another extract that actually, was eye-readable and said what the banner codes meant for which major and concentrations we were dealing with. And then we had a number of weird formatting issues. One of them was in the abstract issue, and this had happened early on in the old system in the first couple 3 months. Of course, students take and they compose their dissertation or thesis in a word processing program, and then they copy it in. And for some reason, in some of the from some of the word processing programs they were using, there were codes in there that were causing the abstracts to bounce down into multiple lines on the Excel spreadsheet. And they were eventually able to fix that in the ETD system, so the extract stopped doing that, but we had to make sure that they weren't doing it in the abstract and do enough comparisons to make sure our abstracts were where they needed to be. We also had a series of ETD numbering jumps where the students would go in, and if they would go in and relog in multiple times and start over from scratch, the system would assign a number each time they would do that. So we have multiple gaps in the numbers that were assigned. So yes, So the next step was to take the data we were getting and clean it up, because we were getting it in some very odd formats. A couple of examples of this were all of our abstracts came out with ampersand NBSP in front of the text, and fortunately IT was able to clean that out for us. The URLs in the extracts were coming out with percent signs in front of them and throughout the URL itself, so the URL was not functional. So they were able to clean that up in IT for us again. And as I said, some of the codes were directly downloaded. And so we talked with this is one of the big discussions we had with the reference department, is they wanted it spelled out, and making sure we got that the spelling out for the major, the concentration, and for the degrees, because they felt it was better for the students to say Doctor of Philosophy rather than PhD. So we made sure of that. Then there were 100 titles that had been created in the early days of the locally grown ETD system, when they didn't have any file restrictions imposed. And so the file names were incorporated into the URLs, and the URLs were just not functioning well because of that, and they wouldn't import into the system in a batch mode. So that had to be done. So those 100 titles had to be put into the new system manually. And then we had a great deal of difficulty getting our embargoes into the system, because they had to be loaded manually too. They just were not going through the way we wanted them to. In addition, there were a couple of other problems when we were getting the load to do that. One of the things we had to figure out was specifically how to get the permanent embargoes in bepress. And I know that the Digital Initiatives Coordinator had long conversations with bepress until they worked out how to get that to function and work in the new system the way we needed it to. So next, and I think I covered that a bit early, the next step was formatting the data for bepress. And as I said, we were iterative, so this was going on the whole time. So I was doing most of this work. I had to compare the output we were getting once we had cleaned it up from the homegrown system with the fields that were available within bepress, and had to crosswalk them all, mapping to which fields were going to go to which fields within bepress. And the extract data worked a little bit differently. And one of the big ones was that I talked about was getting the permanent embargoes to work. We had to create new fields in bepress. We had always used a committee chair, and theirs were all strictly advisor fields, so we had to get a committee chair, and then we had to get a couple of additional advisor fields set up so that it would function. And then we had to have them create fields for the major and for the concentration within the major, because they had not run into that before. So we also, as a part of the major and concentration fields, we also had to send bepress lists of all the correct way in which the correct forms of those and the correct forms for the actual degrees, because the way in which loading from a batch loading is those fields would hit against the field list within bepress, and if the name of the degree coming in from the old system was not in the list in bepress, it would reject them. So we had a number of those that had to be loaded manually as well as getting all of the information from Banner as to exactly what we were using into the bepress coding, and for all of our degrees as well, because we had some degrees that weren't in their master lists. We also had to account for some unique fields in department, and that's more, we weren't using them in the past, but that's something we started using going forward. And they had something called document type, which we had done, which was a different field label from that, but that's basically whether it's a dissertation or a a thesis, but that's where we actually were able to work with our permanently embargoed fields, permanently embargoed titles in those fields. And again, we had to do a lot of work getting the embargoes and the dates in the right format so that everything was working the way we needed it to work. And during the testing process, we created non-real ETDs that had different embargo dates so we could make sure that they were releasing correctly and that the permanent ones weren't releasing. And we had to do a number of tests within bepress where we would load a certain number of the records, we'd test them, and then they'd clean the sandbox out completely, and then we'd reload a whole bunch of new records in to make sure they were displaying and everything was working the way we wanted it to. We had issues with the dates as well because all of the dates were coming in as month, day, year, and of course, for the students, you want the year that the degree was granted, not the date that it was granted. So we had to work on those issues as well, getting everything moved. So we can go next. And then added note. bepress had 3 different fields. And one of the things that I wanted to be able to get into with the records is coming from a cataloging perspective. I am aware that the records that we create today the metadata is going to be lasting in some cases for decades going forward. So we want to be able to account for things that have happened within the records. And one of the things that we did, which is probably not the best thing, but when we migrated from the original from print to the original system, we set it up so that everything that went into the system and the information that was used to create the MARC records in our library catalog system came directly from what the students had input. If you were listening to some of the presentations on cataloging in the previous session, we also did not have enough people in cataloging. We were not keeping up with cataloging our print theses and dissertations. They were getting brief records, so we figured it was better to just take what the students had and roll with it. And yes, there are issues with it. It is not what I would have preferred to have done, but we don't have a backlog with this going forward because of that. Because of that, one of the things that I had put in our catalog records was a note that said that the data was provided by the students. And I wanted that note to go into our digital commons as well, because we do not, in the library, we do not proof any of that data. We accept the data that comes from the graduate school. It's the graduate school that proofs it. Unless something weird comes up that we spot. And I mean, it's something that's so weird that it pops up. So we wanted to get that note in the field. And then we also wanted to get a different note in the new records that said the dissertation or thesis was originally submitted to the local University of Memphis Electronic Theses and Dissertation repository. And the reason I wanted that note in there is because we knew there were going to be differences. We were going to be seeing departments going forward, but not major in concentration. And in the older things, we were seeing major in concentration, but not departments. And having that kind of note helps the user and helps our reference people. If someone comes up and says, why is this different from that? They can read that note and know exactly this is because it's an older record. And the newer records going in say that the dissertation or thesis was originally submitted to ProQuest ETD administrator. So we're keeping those records different. And there are other differences in them as well. So we can go to the next one. And then we've got behind the scenes data that does not display to the public. And I talked about the ETD numbers and the importance of being able to use them as a hook to be able to update our bibliographic records when there are URL changes when we migrate it. And that to be able to migrate, because I'm sure over the life of the ETDs, we will probably at some point in the future migrate again. We originally set it up to have the old number, which displays to the public, and then a new number coming in from the digital commons. We worked with the digital commons and asked them what they thought would be the best number to use. And we started to work with that number. And when I started to work with that number, I realized it was not actually a part of the metadata, but it was a part of what they were using. It looked to me what they were using to identify it. And I was concerned that if it wasn't actually in the metadata itself, we might have trouble migrating that forward. So in discussions with the group, we decided to just take from the old ETD number and start numbering going forward with that. And then we manually, one of the things that I massage coming out of the ETD administrator going forward, going into the digital commons, is creating that new number going forward. Again, the way the degree abbreviations, the reference department, as I said, wanted to say Doctor of Philosophy, Masters of Sociology. But when you create the MARC record formatting uses the abbreviations. So we actually have the degree abbreviations sitting in the back end that we can see, but that the public doesn't see, so that we can use that when we create our MARC records. And going forward, we have also added some more back-end fields that help in the creation of that. We also had one more, go back. And we also created a MARC field. And while the information coming out of bepress is coming out in Excel format, and I tend to think in database format. And so that's where I go in once the records have been loaded into our Sierra ILS. I put a yes in that field, the idea that we know it's been migrated and we don't have to worry about it. Now we can do the next slide. So the final steps were to test and review the results, which we've done. All the data transferred from the old system is into the digital commons, and then we put the ProQuest stuff in. And then the next step was to update the Sierra bibliographic records, which took quite a bit of work with the MARC-Edit program. And being able to just transfer, we had to delete the old URL and insert the new URL into all of the bibliographic records, and insert a note that the information had been transferred. We then had to update OCLC, because if someone is searching WorldShare, they need to be able to get into our ETDs from there. I initially tried to update the OCLC records, but we couldn't do it batch, no matter how much we worked with OCLC. So ITE did a redirect. I'm curious because I don't quite know what'll happen if we migrate again, whether you can redirect or redirect, but we won't be migrating for a while. So hopefully we'll remember that. As part of the cleanup process, bepress did a crawl of our data. And what they were looking for was PDFs that were unusually small. And so we got a list of them, and the PDFs had not transferred. So we had to go out, get the PDFs and reload them. And then I did a data cross-check. I took the data that we had received from the old ETD system and an Excel spreadsheet, and the Excel spreadsheet that we got down from bepress, and I cross-checked to make sure everything that was in one was in the other, just to make sure. That was interesting and took a bit of time because of the way in which some of the things like apostrophes were formatted slightly different in both of them, but I managed to do that. I then took the data out of the digital commons and did an extract from our Sierra ILS and did a cross-check to make sure everything that was in the digital commons was also in our ILS. I found that there were some duplicate records. One of the things that happened that I forgot to mention is that as part of and I apologize for not mentioning this earlier, but as part of the ProQuest issue, at one point, when the graduate school was putting the PhDs separately into ProQuest and not using the system, they had contacted IT and had IT do an extract from ProQuest and had dumped those into the old system. Graduate school thought they were doing it regularly and they had only done it once. But because those had actually gone through the old system and then were picked up on the ProQuest, those are why we had the duplicates, and we were able to clear them out during the cross-check. And then we continue to make changes as needed. Now, the graduate school EEC is something that I really want to talk about because I think it's really important, and it's especially important if you're migrating data from a local database. What we are talking about with the graduate school backend data is the data which the graduate school was using, where they would tell students, we need you to make these changes, we're having this issues with what you're doing, and the data that documented how they had chosen their embargo information. And the reason for the EEC is we've had to use this a couple of times. We had a student that contacted us that was upset because they claimed that we had changed his embargo when we put it in the digital commons and when we put it into the Sierra ILS, that he had embargoed it and we had put it in as not embargoed. And when IT was able to go back and look at those files, they could prove that he had actually selected open access. So thankfully, it let us off the hook, but it showed that we need those files and we need to make sure if IT ever goes anywhere, we have access to them. We had another really, I mean, these things tend to be odd, but we had a couple of really odd things too recently. We had a PhD student contact us through chat that they couldn't get their PDF to open. And that has happened periodically. We usually just contact IT, they resend us the PDF. We open it, reload it, it's fine. I couldn't get this one to open. Contacted IT, they couldn't get it to open, no matter how we tried. And they were able to go into the back records again and find that the graduate school analyst had sent 2 emails to the students saying, we can't open your PDF. Now, why it slipped through the cracks after that, I don't know. Unfortunately, we had to tell the student, we don't have the ability, this happened and we don't have the ability. Hopefully they had it somewhere else. We also had one where the student claimed they had done a thesis and it was online and we had to get back in and check. I was checking files that we had downloaded because he had graduated along the time we had migrated to the new system. And we had special collections involved. We had everyone involved. We had the department involved. And because he wasn't in any of the fields, any of the back end fields. And apparently he had not done a thesis, he'd done a special project. So it wasn't in our system. So that's why, and I think this is really important, not just for homegrown, but I'm concerned about that. You know, if you were to migrate away from, I don't see us migrating away from ProQuest ETD administrator, but if you were to migrate or if you were to change, you may want to make sure that you're keeping those files. I don't know whether anyone else has had this kind of issue, but we have. So now we can go forward. So here are some of my final thoughts, and I wanted to talk a little bit about homegrown systems and some of the issues that I have seen and some of the issues that they present that deeply concern me. Homegrown systems need excellent communication between the silos. Now, we know with ETDs that covers all ETD processing because it's graduate school, it's often libraries, it's faculty, a lot of people are involved. But this becomes much more critical when you're dealing with a homegrown system, because if you're dealing with a commercial system, or even if it's, an open access system, you're going to be told that the system is changing. You're going to be aware of this and you're going to know what's going on. With a homegrown system, we did not know. I mentioned that the graduate school had contacted IT and they'd done a single extract from ProQuest that they had dumped into the old system. I only found that out. We only found out that had happened through this migration. And by chance, when we were trying to figure out, because there were some things that came in that looked really weird. They didn't have when they had come through from the ETD, from the extracts, they just looked weird. And I can't tell you right now, there were fields missing that shouldn't have been missing, that by that point were missing from other records. And we went, and they all had the same date at which they were loaded into the new administrator, into the ETD system, the local ETD system. And the reason I knew that it was a problem because the load date was January 2nd of a year. No, it was January 1st. And we're closed on January 1st, and our institution is closed the week right before Christmas through the day after New Year's. So I knew that they could not have been loaded and could not have had anything done in the old system on that date. And that's the only reason I found out about that, because I was like, I know these weren't done in the normal system because there was nobody here to do the normal system. So really, communication can be really strange in homegrown systems. And the other issue is with homegrown systems, are we too dependent on the people who create the system? What happens if they leave? Coming from the library world, there was one of the very early online cataloging systems, cataloging ILSs, online catalogs, was a system called Notice. You have to be old to remember Notice. But with Notice, one of the requirements if a library had the Notice system was that they had to have a programmer on site, which was cool. They could do all kinds of things with a programmer. But I know, at least anecdotally from a couple of library systems, that when the programmer left, they had to migrate because they couldn't figure out what had been done. So that's one of my questions going forward. The second thing is it's customizable. This is wonderful, except that if you get too customized, can you get the data out in a way that's usable? Going from a homegrown to the other side. The nice thing, as I said, is I could customize the extract that really made it much easier for me to create MARC records. The new system, I had to do quite a bit of programming in the MarcEdit system to get it to create the bibliographic records that were much easier when I could customize the extract. The other question is, how often do they update the system? Is it being updated regularly to incorporate new facets, new facts, new data? Or is it something that got set up one and done and nobody pays any attention to it? And that's something that needs to be considered, because if you're going to keep updating it, you need to have a group that's looking into this. And we were connected to the banner system. What happens if your overarching system migrates? We're moving to Oracle. So, I mean, that would require a significant recalibration of a system anytime it's pulling data from another system. So that's another thing to keep in mind with homegrown systems. And then the big one is, do you have the staffing and the infrastructure and the knowledge to keep it going? And to support it. And that is critical, because one of the things that took a while is all of us that were working on this migration had other duties as well that we were, still struggling to get done. The other thing is with homegrown systems, what might you not have thought about? And now, there are different websites that can help you think about all these things, but it's real easy to miss something that you might be sorry you missed. And then the migration issues. So on the next slide. And then this is just my final thoughts overall is, as I said, make sure you have access to the decision files going forward. Note that you've migrated the records from system to system so that you can differentiate and explain why the records may be different, and then document your decisions. And then going forward, next screen. Thank you, and any questions?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your wonderful presentation. And there's so much that entails in the migration process. And now we're opening the floor for questions. Yes, Austin.
Hi. Yeah, I really enjoyed your presentation. Thanks so much, Liz. It's quite an accomplishment of all that you went through and the team went through. That's really wonderful. And so
Thank
I'm
you.
from ProQuest, I should say. So it was really interesting to hear your thoughts about the process. And as I was listening, I'm thinking about what we might be able to do to make it less painful for you or for others that are listening who might be doing something similar in the future. And the only thing that I can say, so it's not really a question, just more of a comment that I noticed for that when you use ETD Administrator, you don't get the return file set up automatically. So you can do that. So when somebody in the grad school presses send, a copy is sent to bepress. Essentially, we have this migration path, and we'd be happy to activate that for you if you would like.
We actually used the 2 years ago when I first attended this conference. You guys announced that you were now doing the institutional extract, and that's how we do it. And
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh,
that's
because you're doing it.
wonderful because we
Okay,
don't
good.
have XML expertise, and we figured out all your XML, but it took quite some doing on my part to dig into it. And you guys, I will say this, have been wonderful with my saying, can you do this for me to help with it? So that's the way we do
Oh,
it. But
great. You're
thank
already
you.
doing it.
Right.
Great. Oh, I didn't realize that. I'm sorry. I was looking at the back end, but I didn't look hard enough, I guess. So, yeah, okay, great. So if you during this process, and I don't want to take up everybody's time, but if you see anything that stands out to you that could be improved, just send me a quick note or send a quick note to your ProQuest contact, and we'd be happy to fix it, try to fix it for you anyway. But
Thank you.
congratulations. Yeah, on your new IR.
Oh, thank you. Yes, we're very pleased with it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Austin, for your great comment. We see that John has commented here too in the chat. Would you like to talk a little bit about the two homegrown systems that you guys did?
Oh, thanks, Ruth. So, yeah, just a brief comment. I talked about in our ETDs for Beginners workshop, reminiscing about almost 28 years ago. We went through two initial homegrown systems because there weren't other systems. I think Virginia Tech's ETD DB system was the only thing out there at the time, and we didn't have the same backbone structure. So anyway, we started out with the simple Microsoft Access database and some, applications to make that work for submission, review, and then putting them into a repository, so to speak. That went then from the head of the academic computing group to the entire campus OIT group. They reformatted it and revamped it. I had to get them to speak the library language of metadata and stuff and get them to understand the nuances and importances. Anyway, they did our second iteration of a homegrown system, and then eventually they migrated to Digitool, which now I think is offered by ProQuest. It's
Oh,
funny how these things all merge and things, but a very robust and a wonderful system that worked well with our played well with our other systems as well. So that's all I wanted to comment. But I can commiserate on migration. It's not an easy process. And
Thank you.
congratulations on your repository too.
oh, thank you.
Yes, congratulations, Elizabeth. This is wonderful. Lots of effort, and you're a great asset to your institution. Yes, so we have 2 minutes left. We can have one more comment or a question. And I see that in the chat, GW, you have commented. Would you like to talk a little bit about your comment?
Well, one thing I was thinking during the presentation was one thing about our homegrown system is getting the metadata out is no problem. It's all every item has an individual METS XML file. So
Okay, again is
we have it stored in METS XML.
oh, okay. I'm not good with XML. Okay.
It's not it's not tabular. It's a pain unless you have the right tools to manipulate it, which we are working on. But at least it's easy to get out.
Well,
The
that's
real
good.
problem for us is that the quality is very poor on so many records. So we're basically going to migrate a lot of mediocrity and then try to spruce it up.
Well, and I can appreciate that. I mean, we accept what the students give us. So, do you will Mark Edit convert the XML into a Mark format for you?
I have not played around with that. We basically, once it's in our UFDC, our digital platform, we don't, we use those tools to work with
Oh.
that metadata.
Okay,
We don't.
so you don't put it in your catalog?
Oh, we do, but it
Oh, you do?
our current now, well, it's been more than 15 years. And so we're still finding chunks that need to be put in the catalog. But now when we add new stuff, the catalogers create the original record in OCLC, then we export it to ALMA and to UFDC.
Oh, you do it that direction. I get it.
Well, yeah, except, for the digitized theses, dissertations and theses, the print records are already in ALMA, and I pull those to create new metadata for UFDC. And then when the record's online, I derive a new e-record in OCLC and add the URL. So yeah, this is the first conference of ours that I've heard a lot of cataloging talk. And I actually got turned half into a cataloger. So it's fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you, GW. And I know that we can talk for hours for this and such an interesting discussion. Thank you so much, Liz, for your presentation and your sharing of your knowledge for this migration process. And now we will be having a break for 10 minutes. And then coming up, we have sessions 11 in the main room and session number 12 in the breakout room.